First speaker is Paddy Monaghan, who will give
feedback on his experiences in that area. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Faulkner. I'll try to keep this. Faulkner said I have 10 minutes. I'll try to keep it well below that. So I'm here on behalf of a group called Education Equality. I didn't start the group. I only joined it a couple of months ago. It's been going less than a year, and if anyone feels like joining, look at educationequality.ie or look at the Facebook page or have a chat with me afterwards if you like what you hear. So why education equality exists is as follows. Let's pretend nobody in the room knows anything about access to Irish schools, although I bet you do all know this already, so I'll keep it brief. The law in Ireland in terms of access is that 96% of schools in this country are run by religious institutions. Now, they're paid for by taxpayers. The teachers are paid for, their salaries are paid for by taxpayers. If there's building works, renovations, etc., the buildings themselves, all paid for by taxpayers. But for historical reasons that I'm sure John Suttle will go into later, they tend to be, the patron of the school tends to be a religious denomination in 96% of schools. The law in Ireland, the Equal Status Act, says that those schools can prioritise a child in admissions on the basis of religion. I've said that sentence so many times in the past year that it just rolls off the tongue, but it actually is just, it's breathtaking, it's shocking when you think about it. It's grossly undemocratic. I'm not sure if anyone in the room was unaware of that. So that's reason one why education equality exists. It's a voluntary group consisting largely of parents and concerned citizens and concerned people, that such a law would exist in a country where our taxpayer-funded schools, the vast majority, can prioritise school kids in admissions on the basis of religion. Typically, opponents of this will say, well, it only happens where a school is oversubscribed, but the answer to that is, of course it happens where a school, if a school is undersubscribed, they'll take a three-headed alien if they have to. They'll do anything because they need the capitation grant in order to survive. So, yes, of course, when a school is oversubscribed, the number one enrolment criterion in 96% of schools is the religion of a child, which is just absolutely insane, if you ask me. The other aspect that education equality stands for is equal respect, and it's just as important. So we're about equal access to schools, but also equal respect during the school day. And this is something, unfortunately, that tends to be overlooked quite a lot. Equal respect means that once you're in the classroom, kids should be treated the same, regardless of their religious background. We're trying to deal with the education system that we've got. Plenty of people in this room, I'm sure, would love it if we had an entirely secular education system, and that might well be a great thing. I don't know if that's ever going to happen in my lifetime. I'm a dad, it so happens, to an 18-month-old child, and I really would like him to go to the local school and to get equal respect at that school. The way in which we aim to achieve that is simply by moving the teaching of religion to the end of the school day, outside of core school hours, so that in our local taxpayer-funded school, the patron will remain the same, the denomination of the school will be the same, but the teaching of religion and religious lessons and religious preparation, faith formation I think is probably a more accurate term in fact, faith formation takes place outside of core school hours at the end of the school day, so that kids are treated the same. Often anecdotes, I think, illustrate these issues better than just words. As I said, about 20% of schools, according to the ESRI, are oversubscribed. And that's 1 in 5 schools that will turn away your child if they're not the right religion. People like Rupesh Panikkar, whose daughter was turned away from all the local schools. Nikki Murphy, her son was turned away from 8 schools last year because he wasn't the right religion to get into those local schools in his locality. Rupesh's daughter, 4 years old at the time, I think, summed up the situation absolutely perfectly. She said, "Daddy, why can't I go to school with my friends from creche?" She didn't say, "Daddy, I want a Hindu school." The dad happens to be Hindu. "Dad, I want a Hindu school," or "Dad, I want a multi-denominational school built right here." She said, "Daddy, why can't I go to school with the kids from creche?" And to be honest with you, my outlook is very similar personally. I want my kid to go to the school with the local kids who play GAA and the kids from the road, and people have different priorities in terms of their kids' education, but I do think that prioritising kids in access on the basis of religion is absolute madness. Again, people will say it only affects 20% of schools, but the fact is you will never know in this country from year to year whether or not your local school will be oversubscribed. So clearly the safest thing to do is get your child baptised. And if somebody asked me, what is the best way of maximising my child's education opportunities in terms of access in this country, I couldn't lie to them. I'd have to say, baptise your child. Baptise them Catholic, because in over 90% of schools we're talking about Catholic schools. So in terms of access, sadly, that's the situation at the moment. And respect is equally important. An anecdote that illustrates this, one of our members, I just think this sums it up perfectly, the problem with the teaching of religion, of faith formation in school at the moment. Mother dropped off her child at school that morning, realised that the child had forgotten her lunch. This is one of our members. This happens all the time. This happens every single day. So anyone who thinks this only affects 20% of schools, I think this gives the lie to that. The mother realised her child had forgotten her lunch, so the mother went home, got the lunch, came back. It was about 11:30 at this stage, and there she saw religion lessons were taking place. The children were gathered at the top of the classroom, singing songs in a group, and her child was sitting on her own at a desk at the back, doing busy work, mindless busy work, sitting on her own. The child is segregated, the child is separated every single day of her school life from the age of 4 to the age of 12 in primary school, and that is 100% normal. At the moment, if my child is lucky enough to get into our local school, which happens to be oversubscribed, that'll happen to him too. So I don't think it's good enough just to get access. Respect is absolutely equally important, and that basically we need to change the law in those areas. We're talking about the Education Act 1998 in terms of dealing with equal respect. I mean, I'm a lawyer. It so happens our group, we have a legal group within education equality. The Constitution is often, I think, in the most cynical fashion, the Constitution is used as if it's some kind of barrier to changing these laws. It's not. Look, that's the short version. We can talk about it all night, but it's not. If it was, so what? Let's change the Constitution. The question is this a good law or a bad law? If it's a bad law, let's do what we have to do to change it. Saying it's in the Constitution, I mean, slavery was in the Constitution of America, but they changed that, you know? So I don't think the fact that it's in the Constitution is sufficient of an answer, but the fact is, religious freedom is the argument used to maintain the status quo. So the fact that there is a constitutional right to a constitutional obligation that a parent must educate their child, a constitutional guarantee that the state will provide for education, a constitutional guarantee that there shall be no discrimination on the basis of religion. For some reason, all of these guarantees are being overlooked, and a very unusual reading of religious freedom is being used so that institutions, I mean, religious freedom in the running of churches I can understand, but how an institution that contributes nothing financially to a school can discriminate in enrolment over individuals. I always thought the Constitution was there to protect the rights of individuals as opposed to institutions. So it's an extremely poor constitutional argument, and people with better constitutional knowledge than me from both our group, Education Equality, we have a senior counsel's opinion that says repeal of the access law, not only does the Constitution not stop us doing that, the Constitution requires that we repeal that law, and academic experts from a group called Equate have backed that up as well. Needless to say, the government haven't published any opinion that they're basing their views on. So what are we doing to deal with this in education equality? As I said, we're representing parents. We have hundreds and hundreds of families now in our group. It's a voluntary group. We have our legal group that have researched this. We try to argue in the media. We try to provide an opposing voice to those extremely unusual groups such as the Iona Institute, because they get so much media time, one would think that they're very representative. But I'm very wary of statistics. I'm very wary of opinion polls when it comes to access to taxpayer-funded schools and the right of access, because it is a constitutional right. It's a human right. Discrimination is a breach of our human rights. So when it comes to, I kind of get goosebumps when people talk about opinion polls about human rights, because I don't give a damn. If 0 people think it's okay, think it's if nobody wants to change it, it doesn't change the fact that it's wrong. So I don't really care about opinion polls. But the fact is, Ipsos poll last year showed that 95% of people were in favour of changing the law relating to access to schools. That's 95%, a hell of a lot of practising Catholics in that group. So there's loads of practising Catholics in my extended family, and they all think this law is absolute baloney. And they totally agree with regard to respect during the school day also. So there's no correlation between anyone's particular religion, generally speaking, and how they feel about excluding children from their local taxpayer-funded school on the basis of religion. So yeah, in the media, providing a voice on that basis. Then finally, lobbying for change, because ultimately this is legislative change that we're trying to get. So if anyone here is wondering what can you do, talk to your local TD, hammer your local TD, just say, I want you to step up in the Dáil and speak on this. Ask them what is their party doing on it. So in our lobbying, we've met all the major parties at this stage. The Anti-Austerity Alliance, People Before Profit, have been extremely supportive. They've been absolutely great on it. Social Democrats also great on both of the aspects of what we're trying to achieve. Sinn Féin, strong support, particularly on access, on the respect issue in terms of moving religion to the end of the school day. There's a bit of a way to go there, I think, with Sinn Féin, but we're getting there. Fianna Fáil, in their manifesto, if you look at your local enrolment policy to your school, nearly all of them will have religion as the number one enrolment criterion. They will say local Catholics, for example, local Catholic children first. Then very often they'll say Catholic children from outside the area second. So Fianna Fáil's manifesto position at the last election was to change it so that local Catholic kids from outside the area couldn't come second anymore. So really, they were moving unbaptised kids and minority religion kids from third-class citizenship to second-class citizenship, which is pretty useless if you ask me, but that was their position anyway. Interestingly enough, Labour have tabled a bill, an access to schools bill recently, and sadly, that's exactly what they're proposing as well. I think it's a huge letdown from Labour. I don't understand what their point of view is on this. They didn't explain it particularly clearly, but I mean, Labour have 7 TDs, so I don't know how influential they are in any case, but they tabled their bill that ultimately would see unbaptised kids and minority kids moved up from third-class citizenship to second-class citizenship. In other words, once the local, again, to generalise, not all these schools are Catholic, but over 90% are, so once the local Catholic children are taken care of, then comes the local unbaptised kids, local minority kids, as opposed to Catholic kids from outside the area. It just seems to be people tripping over themselves to complicate the matter, when really all I'm saying is kids should have access to their local school regardless of religion. And it's equality of opportunity that I'm talking about, not guarantee. I don't expect my kid to be guaranteed a place at the local school. All I'm saying is level the playing field, put the name in a drum, and let religion be an irrelevant factor. Yeah, fine, I'll just wrap it up now. So Fine Gael ultimately, sadly, haven't taken on any of these things. They've just published an admission to schools bill themselves that completely ignores this issue. So the elephant in the room has been ignored by Fine Gael. Finally, their focus has been on choice. Addressing a proposed change to the Equal Status Act, the Minister, Richard Bruton, used the word, I counted 6 times in one paragraph, the word choice. He didn't mention the word equality once. He was talking about the Equal Status Act, our bastion of equality law in this country. He didn't mention equality once. He mentioned choice 6 times in a paragraph. Choice sounds great. It sounds touchy-feely. It sounds wonderful. If we don't have equal access to our local school, you can't choose to go there. He's talking about building 400 new schools to give choice. What choice means, if we don't have equality of access to our taxpayer-funded schools, choice means a Muslim school here, a Hindu school here, a Jewish school here, a Protestant school here, a few Catholic schools here, as if this is what people want, as if we want to hyper-segregate our 4-year-old children in order to provide this ephemeral notion of choice. I think choice is great, and later on Paul will be talking about, obviously, Educate Together schools, which are bloody brilliant, absolutely brilliant and essential for people who want a proper non-religious education. As he'll explain properly, Education Together schools are vital. But ultimately, it won't change the fact that we have a deeply discriminatory, unconstitutional law that allows schools to prioritise kids on the basis of religion. That's where we stand at the moment. Hope I haven't been too negative, but what I would say is there's only one way to deal with it, that is legislation. It will be dealt with in legislation, and the way that happens is by pressurising TDs. So, if you're wondering what you can do, talk to your families over dinner tonight, talk to your sisters, your brothers, and tell them to talk to their TDs. Tell them to hammer with their TDs. There's more information anyway on the Education Equality website, educationequality.ie. Thanks very much.
Now, I think people very often forget the long-term effect of primary education and the forgotten and almost subconscious effect. But clearly, we're talking about a scenario in this country where even getting into the schools can have its own effect. Coming up is the question then of who owns the schools, because we're often hearing about Catholic schools and Protestant schools. So John Suttle of the Irish National Schools Trust will address that.
Sorry, John Suttle, Irish National Schools Trust. I brought this just to remind you what it was to be a national school. I'm just going to run through this. If your solicitor says we're only going to give 10 minutes to when you're buying your next house, I'd move solicitor, but you're only getting 10 minutes on this. I'm going to start off with an ordinary property, not a school property. This is, I've been involved in commercial property for 30 years at this stage, and this is a school, or this is a pharmacy on Vernon Avenue in Clontarf. The freehold owner is the Vernon Estate, which is the second largest landholder in Dublin, second to the Pembroke Estate. The building owner is Bartoland Limited, who pay €1 or £1 a year to the Vernon Estate on a 999-year lease. The people who run the pharmacy are Orion Pharmacy, and they pay €30,000 a year to Bartoland Limited. And as a subtenant to the pharmacy, there's a doctor upstairs in this premises who runs a surgery, and he pays €8,000 a year to Bartoland Limited. Now, the actual names, the actual prices are slightly different just for confidentiality reasons. But you see here now that there's only the doctor as an individual. The other three entities here are some sort of multiple ownership, and there might be 10, 20 or more people involved in ownership of this property. So really what you should be looking at is not ownership as you would understand it in relation to a house or an apartment, but who has a legal interest in a property and what are their rights and what are their obligations. Now we move around the corner onto Seafield Road in Clontarf, just around the corner from the other property, and this is Clontarf National School. Again, the freehold owner is the Vernon Estate. They have given a 250-year lease from 1940 for its use as a national school, and only for its use as a national school. There is a lease then between the trustees and the Minister for Education and the Archbishop of Dublin from 1943, and the first party is the St. Lawrence O'Toole Trust, which is the trust which generally holds most property in Dublin for the Archdiocese. Now, they only got the property in 1993 through a very dubious process, at no cost, of course, and that's for another day. And the Minister for Education is our third person. The legal rights of ownership for all of these people is conditional. So we have to go through the conditions to understand. Just to understand what a school is, this is probably is well defined anywhere. It's not, famously ethos is not defined anywhere, but legally this is section 15(2)(b) of the 1998 Education Act, and it talks about a school being defined by its cultural, educational, moral, religious, social, linguistic and spiritual traditions. But also down the bottom here, you'll see that it's defined by such instruments relating to the establishment or operation of the school. And what I'd like to do is to get you to consider that schools and ownership and conditions of ownership are based on evidence, not on assertions by me or Paddy or Paul Rowe or the Archbishop of Dublin, or certainly not on newspaper articles. So just to see if you can get evidence, actual written evidence, and there are millions of documents related to schools. And I'm using this local school as an example. The school was founded in 1846 on Vernon Avenue, around the corner from where it is now. And as with all national schools, you'll see the conditions when the school was opened. You'll see here, will the school be bona fide open to children of all religious denominations? And as with all national schools, the answer is yes. And that is part of every national school, every school in receipt of state funding at primary level. You'll see also in the foundation documents details relating to the separation of religious instruction during the day. And as usual, it's detailed. In this case, the times are slightly varied in different schools, but detailed at a half an hour a day for religious instruction, and the rest of the day is devoted to secular instruction. Again, this is part of the school, part of the documentation in relation to its ownership and the running of the school. This particular school, again, you might be under the impression that the Catholic Church founded and funded lots and lots of schools. I've never come across a case where this is actually real. This is a school under Catholic patronage. It was founded by the Vernons in 1846. The Vernons are famously Protestants, came over with Cromwell. The Vernon estate dates back to the late 1600s and is still in existence. And John Edward Dennis Vernon, who founded the school, remained as patron until he died, and it remained with the Vernon estate into the 1900s. When the school was set up in 1846, but as you can imagine, Clontarf hugely expanded during the 1930s and 1940s and there was need for a new school. So the school was moved around the corner into a much larger premises. And again, the premises were provided at no cost by the Vernon estate for the new school. This is Edward Kingston Vernon, was the head of the Vernon family at this stage. And here is the lease, which is the basic document for the school from 1943. And you'll see here, again, the conditionality of ownership. You'll see that a national school, in connection with the minister, shall at all times be maintained upon the said premises, and every school to be kept on the premises hereby demised shall be subject to the rules and regulations of the minister. So this is basic documentation for every national school, that it shall be a national school and kept as a national school, and it shall be ruled and regulated by the Minister for Education, not the patron, not the Board of Management. The powers of the patron and the Board of Management derive from the power of the Minister for Education. Until independence, it used to be the National Board. And you'll see further down this same document that these are only 3 or 4 page documents, lots of them available around the place. When the school was set up in Vernon, or around the corner in 1940, there was a requirement for £12,000 to be spent on new buildings, and £8,000 was provided by the Minister for Education here, and £4,000 was provided by voluntary contribution and local subscriptions. And there are significant rules in relation to, legal rules in relation to looking for donations for the foundation of the school. It must remain as a school. And again, you'll see no funding provided by the church. And further down the same document, this document is signed by John Charles McQuaid, very famous Archbishop of Dublin. And you'll see that it describes here the school shall be run according to under national education for the combined literary and moral and separate religious instruction, as Paddy talked about, separate religious instruction to children of all persuasions, as far as possible to say so, on the fundamental principle that no attempt shall be made to interfere with the peculiar religious tenets of any description of Christian pupils. Now, the Christian aspect was actually dropped in the 1937 Constitution, so they can't actually discriminate in favour of Christians. That was removed in the Constitution 1937, which is prior to this. The way of ensuring separate religious instruction, this is a board which was put on the door of every room in every school in Ireland, and on one side it has religious instruction, which was turned around showing religious instruction for the half an hour a day. On the other side it has secular instruction. This board is actually from that school in Clontarf, but if any of you haven't been passing Blarney Folk Park, there's exactly the same board in the school within the park down there. There was an attempt in 1997 to subvert the leases for national schools by creating these deeds of variation. Any of you who've been involved in boards of management of schools under Catholic patronage or under other patronage, you might have the same issue. There was a concept that they were going to change the leases by having deeds of variation to the leases, which would make some attempt to change them from being national schools to being denominational schools. For instance, in that document we saw earlier, there's no mention of this being a Catholic school or a church barn school or any other type of school, whereas the deed of variation, if it had happened, has 32 mentions of Catholic in the Catholic document over 3 pages. However, although there was agreement with the minister for this to happen, it actually didn't happen. There were a small number signed up to 2006, but none have been signed since then, apparently following advice from the Attorney General pointing out the unconstitutionality of the state supporting denominational education. I was just recently down in Clare, and I just came across this. This is the school down in Mount Shannon, just on the far side of Lough Derg. And again, the same position was there. The school was founded by the local landlord in 1844. It was a very standard way of founding schools. Now, And just as we have Paddy Monaghan here, this is an extract from the National School in Raheny. Paddy's from Raheny. And in it you'll see the same two conditions that are in the ownership and running of all national schools. Is the school going to be the opportunity denomination? Yes. And here we have some details about the separate religious instruction. And this is available for, Paddy earlier mentioned Nicky Murphy. Nicky Murphy actually was looking to get her child into Terranure, so we had to look up at that school. And again, the same provisions in the foundation of the school in Terranure. I think it was called Old Town or something when the school was founded. But the same thing here. Will the school be going to be yes. And again, details about the separate religious instruction. Now, if anybody is actually interested in acting on this, we were asked a couple of years ago in 2014 by a parent of a child, a non-Catholic child in Clontarf, if we could help in getting the child into the school, into this local school that I was showing you earlier, which is a big school, it has over 1,400 pupils, one of the biggest schools in the country. And it has a Catholics First admissions policy. And we said that we recommended that she look to bring a case under the Equal Status Act. The Equality Tribunal is cheap, free, easy. No court, no circuit court, no district court, circuit court, high court. God help us if Ivanovic ever tries to bring something to the Supreme Court. Living in the dream world. Easy to bring Equal Status Act. And this was a form that we sent to the school, having confirmed that the child was not getting in. And we asked the school to provide documentation. There's a discovery process, if any of you know the legal terminology, but there's a discovery process involved in the Equal Status Act. And we asked for documentation relating to the foundation of the school in the 1840s, documentation relating to the transfer of the school from Bernardi to Stephen Grove, documentation relating to the separation of the junior boys' school and the senior boys' school, documentation relating to the introduction of religious discrimination in admissions. You might think that religious discrimination in admissions has been around forever, but if you talk to your brothers or your fathers or mothers, you'll find that this was not an issue in the 1990s or the 1980s or the 1970s. People went to the local school. But the way we ended up with a sort of separate denominational system was that people voluntarily, Catholics voluntarily, would bypass the local Church of Ireland national school to go to the national school under Catholic patronage, and vice versa. But I know people who went to Church of Ireland school who were Catholics. In Clontarf now the Church of Ireland school is completely dominated by Catholics. In fact, my brother was telling me about the school in Ranelagh, Sanford National School, which is a Church of Ireland school. 30 people were leaving the school at the end of 6th class. 27 of them made their confirmation. Church of Ireland, I don't think Church of Ireland does confirmations. 27 is what's happening. Sorry, anyway, so speaking about the introduction of religious discrimination, where are we? In 2002, details of how the St. Lawrence O'Toole came to own the property in the 1990s and how they sold a bit of the property and pocketed the funds. And finally, all documentation showing the impact of admission of single non-Catholic on needs of the school, which was the basis of this section 73C, which Paddy might have mentioned earlier, is that somehow introducing one child, non-Catholic, to school has to destroy the ethos of the school, and really this isn't reasonable, not going to happen. We know that's true. Within 4 working days of this discovery being sent to the school, the child was given a place in the school, and there was an introduction. You can see sort of the paler bit here. There was an introduction of a unique clause into the admissions policy of Belgrove Junior Boys School, this Clontarf National School, Junior Boys School. And it has here, the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Dublin shall be the person who decides whether a boy is a member of a church which is in full community with the Church of Rome, or otherwise Roman Catholic as defined by in this clause. So the Archbishop of Dublin can now decide, and did in this case, we presume, did in this case decide that the child who was not Catholic and was of a church that is not in full communion with the Catholic Church actually is a Catholic. So you don't need to get baptized anymore. The Archbishop of Dublin can define you as being Catholic. Very unusual and unique to this school, I believe. Sorry, we're nearly the last thing. If you want to act, try and look for a history of the school, not what's on the website. Well, look at what's on the website and try and find out what you'll find maps and all sorts of things available. Lots of documents available in the National Archives. Look for legal documents, leases, etc. Use the Equal Status Act of the Equality Tribunal. It is easy and cheap and quick. Section 7.2 is what Paddy was talking about, which is bans discrimination on religious grounds. But a very useful one would be section 12.1, which bans the publication of an intent to discriminate. Now, neither of these have ever been used. I was looking up today, the Equality Tribunal has never made a decision on any case related to these. That's it. Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much. Now, I admit I am being slightly rigorous on time with the lads because we're hoping to have a nice discussion at the end of all of this. Paddy has conveyed to us that it's difficult to get into a national school. Many of the schools we will hear discussed are referred to as Catholic schools, and as John has just pointed out, Catholic in that context doesn't automatically mean owned by. The question of ethos arises. So dealing with the question of getting into the school is one thing. Now what happens in the school is the next question. And on that we come to the rules for national schools, which many people will say have been superseded by circular letters and so forth. But unless there's a circular letter that rules out something previously from a national school rule, it still remains in effect. Rule 68 was removed in January by Minister Jan O'Sullivan, and Rule 68 is one which is a bit too long to remember, but it does include the statement that of all the subjects, religion is by far the most important, and then very flowerily goes on to address everything else and how religion should dominate all else. Rule 68, as I said, was removed by Jan O'Sullivan, and in an election year, the sitting government is always a little bit nervous. So I think the fact that Midwest humanists in Limerick were in Jan O'Sullivan's constituency, and we have 3 of the Midwest humanists here, who did slightly pester the minister, as indeed, of course, we all did nationally, but as I say, in an election year, slightly unpopular government, the minister in your constituency, it's an opportunity, they took it. Rule 68 is gone. So the question now is, where do we go from this point in? We have Paul Rowe from Educate Together who will give his views and observations with regard to Rule 68 now that it's officially gone. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me to talk. I think how I'm going to sort of take this is from a slightly different perspective, and that is from the perspective of children in schools and the struggle to create schools in which human rights and equality are the guiding principle of their operation, and the struggle to provide that such schools since the founding of Educate Together in 1975 and the opening of the first Educate Together school in 1978. The issue here is how do we as a society or as educators regard the individual rights of children in schools? And that is that no child chooses their parents, no child chooses the place of their birth, the ethnicity or the religious background of their parents. No child chooses any part of their genetic makeup. And therefore, as a result, it is impermissible, it is totally counterproductive to treat children unequally on account of their background in an educational environment. It is profoundly contrary to the objectives of education, and it's profoundly negative to the whole question of a society getting the benefit or the maximum benefit of the human potential of its population. So this question of whether we have an educational environment which has as its core principle or its prime directive equality of access and equality of esteem to children, irrespective of their social, cultural, or religious background, is actually a fundamental educational objective in today's world, not just in Ireland, but throughout the world. And it's intimately bound up with the whole question of preparing this generation of children for their life in the latter part of the 21st century, and actually a productive life well into the 22nd century. It's quite shocking to realize that the 4-year-old children who are going to be starting their primary education this September, most of them will see the 22nd century, and if they're girls, most of them will live a productive life well into their 80s and live beyond the year 100. So this question of what type of world, what type of preparation that we are providing for children in today's world is really important. I've been asked to talk about the national curriculum in Ireland, and John has actually detailed some of the elements of it, so I'm just going to try and dovetail into it. But the national curriculum, as defined in the Stanley Letter of 1831 and the rules of national schools, had as its founding principle the separation between moral and literary education on one hand and religious instruction on the other. And that fundamental separation did provide for the right to absent in a practical way. The signs that John has shown you were the standard form in which parents of children of a minority perspective could absent their children from periods of time when one priest or the other was conducting religious instruction. That principle was very rapidly eroded by the 1860s, when first the Protestant churches and then the Catholic churches moved in to control what they referred to as the patronage of schools. And then the reality was, at the turn of the century, that type of provision of abstention had been very, very profoundly eroded. However, it remained in the rules of national schools right up until 1965, and it was only after 1965 that the denominational nature of the national school system was actually written into the rules for national schools. And a critical point or critical juncture was in the new curriculum of 1971. It's called the integrated curriculum or the child-centered curriculum, in which for the first time, actually for very profoundly sound educational objectives, that the subjects of the curriculum were integrated, that children were expected to be taught in a creative, integrated fashion around stories, around projects, and that in the handbook of the teacher's handbook of that curriculum, it was laid down that from that time forward, the ethos of the school, or the characteristic of the school, should permeate the entire school program. In a sentence, the right to absent became completely ineffective and was negated. And it is as a result of that there was the considerable agitation against it. And it was a complex agitation, which on one hand was supporting the progressive educational objectives of the curriculum, whilst acknowledging the fact that it became impossible to have a separation between religious and literary and moral education in schools, in the vast majority of schools, and it became impossible practically for a child to be absented from religious content in the school program. The fact is, families contact Educate Together by their hundreds each year, talking about what is a constitutional and statutory right to absent, and what is the practical effect of making such a request. I have to say, and I've been dealing with this for the best part of 20 years now, in the vast majority of cases, and this is shameful, in the vast majority of cases, after a discussion of the actual practical impact on a child, on a request to absent, the parents decide that they do not have the right to impose their religious viewpoint on their children in such a way as it will damage the socialization of their child in school. And as a result, this infringement, this fundamental infringement of human rights and of intellectual rights and the freedom of religion in our society is driven underground. And only in a very small minority of courageous people has the issue been raised in principle. These are the type of people who have been involved in the development and the development and growth of the Educate Together alternative in Ireland, which has, I think, now proved that it is possible to operate a primary and secondary school environment in Ireland in which there is a guarantee of equality of esteem to children irrespective of their social, cultural, religious backgrounds. And it is possible to generate a curriculum, a values proposition in education which is genuinely respectful of human rights. The Educate Together movement in 2004 published its ethical education curriculum, which takes the place of the time allocated to religious patrons in our system and uses it for a program in which has 4 strands. It has moral and spiritual development of the individual from a functional and human development point of view. It has a strand of equality and justice. It has a strand of belief systems, which provides intercultural information for children of all the major faith perspectives in the world, including the atheist, agnostic and humanist persuasion. And I just have to say thank you for the Humanist Association of Ireland for sponsoring lesson plans on humanism, which are in pilot at the moment and we hope will be formally published in the new year, to augment that particular part of the program. And then the 4th strand is a strand of ethics, ethics in the environment, which is defined in its broader sense of environmental responsibility, social responsibility, and the general theme of education for sustainable development. So we've demonstrated that this can be done. The question is, how can we make this type of education more available in Ireland today? We have always supported the agitation for equality, for the abolition of religious discrimination in all forms of social, in social services or social facilities in Ireland. We took this issue to the United Nations in 2005 and were the body which actually advocated that there is no educational reason or obligation or need, even for a faith-based school, to discriminate against children on religious grounds in terms of admission in order to protect its ethos. When we talk about ethos, you're talking about the unique selling point of a school, and if a unique selling point is not going to be attractive to people in such a way as it's going to encourage people to join your school, then no amount of discrimination is going to protect it. So where we're at present, we're opening 9 schools in the next month. This August for Educate Together is one of our most busy periods. We don't have summer holidays like the rest of the education system appears to have. We're opening 4 primary schools and 5 secondary schools. all of those schools are as a result of fantastic support in communities for these developments, and are based on a huge amount of voluntary and community support. We would entirely support the continuing agitation for a much more robust legislative environment in which equality and rights are dealt with in relation to children and families in our education system, and we will continue to support that. But children today haven't got time to wait. Children today need schools. We've today are increasing the capacity of the Educate Together movement by approximately 4,800 spaces. That is a real thing that is happening for real children and real families now. And we feel that it is our prime directive to work as hard as we possibly can to build a national network of such schools, so that all families in the country should have a realistic chance of an access to a school in which their children is guaranteed equality within 30 minutes travel time in the rush hour in the morning. That means a very different distance in the country than it does in the part of Dublin that I live in. But that means a national network of around 300 to 400 schools. We're prepared to work with anybody in order to deliver that, and we're utterly committed to do so. It is scandalous, however, that repeated governments are refusing to fund the process of opening new Educate Together schools. I said we're opening 5 secondary schools this year. We receive 0 grant for the development work that we have to put into to do that. It costs us, on average, €100,000 to open a secondary school and 65,000 to open a primary school. We do get €10,000 to open a primary school. But I think you can realise that this is just a huge restraint. We have 18 areas of the country which were surveyed in 2012, in which the department has formally agreed that there is need from families to have Educate Together provision, and yet nothing has been able to be delivered in those areas. And we are absolutely convinced that if similar surveys were done throughout the country today, in this year, that those figures would be 3 or 4 times higher than they are now. In particular, in the Dublin area, Paddy Monaghan has been talking about the agitation that education equality has been made. And when we did apply for schools in the Dublin area, we are talking about 1,700, 1,700 applications being made on behalf of children who are due to start school in the next 2 years for the schools which we applied for. We're opening 2 of them in 3 weeks' time. But that illustrates the sheer level of demand. And what I'm just going to finish on is that we would fully support all the type of agitations that are being detailed here. But as I said, things have to move now. Provision has to be made available for children now, and I'd ask you to support Educate Together's campaign and work in any way you can. And I suppose I'd like to finish by thanking the Humanists Association and humanists in Ireland over many, many years who have been fantastic support to our work and have put their shoulders to the wheel of the Educate Together movement many, many times before, and you have a very honoured reputation in our movement, and so thank you very much indeed.
He's tall. Now, where do we go from there? I've learned lots there myself, I have to admit, and it does rather indicate that this is a pushing and pressing issue. Now, we'll have a discussion because I'm sure there's a bunch of questions that have popped into people's minds. Can I just see a quick show of hands? How many people have got a question they want to ask? It's 1. Just give me a sense of, okay. Now, We are, just so you know, videoing this this afternoon, just to give a sense to the outside world of some of the things that we do. All right. Anyone who has concerns about being seen on video or being recorded, please proceed as normal. Pretend there is nothing there, and then make sure you talk to me after, because it is obviously a concern. We are talking about Rule 68, its implications and so forth, and how we're going to affect it. So we will pass the microphone.